Welcome, and thank you for joining me on the Spiritual Ninja podcast, where we have heart to heart conversations with people who live with spiritual depth and elite performance. Hello, Terry. Welcome to the Spiritual Ninja podcast. It's really a pleasure to meet you and have you here today. And I really look forward to this time together.
You too. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, I find these conversations, the word that comes to me is intimacy, because I'm asking people to try to give the listener and myself an opportunity to step inside of you and understand and experience as much as we can from the beginning of your spiritual journey to where you are today, as far as your practices, your journey, the ups and downs, anything that you could share with us that would give us an opportunity to kind of go on this internal spiritual journey of Terry.
Well, I'm not asked that very often, so that's quite intimate. Well, very fortunately, I was born in Montana, and in a small town. My folks were academics. There's a little town of Bozeman, which has Montana State. It was Montana State College then, and then it became Montana State University. So growing up there basically a rural community, the Gallatin Valley. Bozeman sits at one end of the Gallatin Valley. At the other end of the valley is the Three Forks of the Gallatin, the Jefferson, and the Missouri rivers that join into them become the Missouri. And so it was just a lot of nature, mountains all around, and then this very fertile valley, and it was just very rich in terms of nature. And so as kids, we'd ride our bikes. We could ride our bikes right out to the edge of town. There's a little creek there that we'd go fishing and kind of up in the edge of the mountains. And I had an experience up there. I went up there once. I was up there by myself, and they had this little cave, more of an outcropping, but it felt like a cave. We pretended it was a cave, and sitting there, and somehow got to thinking about my death, and imagined myself dying and dissolving back into nature, just dissolving into the ground. And at the time, I thought, wow, that's kind of wild, but it kind of stayed with me. And I realized that maybe something kind of happened there. And my folks were pretty religious. My father was an art history and sculpture professor, and my mother was a painter. And so they were very connected with nature as well. And at one point, my dad got very interested in Japanese art, and as part of his teaching art history. And he was spending a fair amount of time in Japan, and he brought back these extraordinary books, photographs of Japanese art and architecture. And then he brought back woodblock and brush paintings, works of art. And I'm looking at this work, and I was in high school at that time, and I just couldn't believe how beautiful this was. I mean, I was used to nature, but this is a whole different level of nature. And it was the way the architecture, these gardens, these rock gardens, and the trees and everything just blending in, this incredible just wholeness about it. It was just phenomenal. And I was like, what kind of mind is this that sees the world in this way? And I ended up writing a poem. A friend of mine was the editor of the school paper, and he said, "Hey, Terry, write a poem for the paper." And I don't know, I was kind of playing around with poetry a little bit. So I wrote this poem, "Dig you, dog, your bone of being is buried deep." I have no idea where that came, but everybody was kind of amused by it. Like, oh, yeah, well, wow, what's going on with him? You know? But so anyway, so I was interested in Buddhism. I got interested in Buddhism through that Japanese art, through the architecture and the art, and interested in the philosophy, the way of seeing nature and seeing our nature in the context of nature, and read a bit about it. And then for years after, ended up going to graduate school and getting involved, moving to New York, having a studio. Moved up to Mexico, had a studio down there. I was working as a sculptor and then doing a lot of other gigs too, just this is the nature of the craft. But I continued to do the reading. At one point, when I was going to do my graduate work in Oregon, a friend of mine who was a computer programmer had moved down to Berkeley, from Eugene down to Berkeley. And he called me up one day and he said, "Terry, you got to come down. You got to come down, man. You got to check this out." I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He says, "My painting teacher, man, you've got to meet my painting teacher." So I had another friend down there in Berkeley as well. So, I went down, and he said, "So you just call him Rinpoche. You can't really pronounce his name. So just call him Rinpoche." I said, "Okay, well, that sounds good." So we went over there, and we climbed up these stairs, this little apartment, and we walked in, and here's this little Buddhist monk, and he's bowing, and we're bowing and everything. And he had a hammer and some nails on the floor and had this little shelf that he was trying to put onto the wall, with a hammer and nails, and it was kind of on the wall. It was kind of like this, kind of cattywampus. And we looked at his project there. All three of us just burst out laughing. I mean, it was hilarious. It was like a cartoon about not to put up a shelf.
That's how I would do it.
Yeah, it was just a riot. So, I mean, immediately broke the ice, and so we just yakking away, and he says, "So you wanna see my paintings?" And Lane had told me that he was a Tonka painter. He painted Tonka paintings, and I didn't really know what a Tonka painting was, and Lane says, "This is gonna blow your mind." Well, okay, sounds good. He said, "I want you to photograph everything he shows us and take details too." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." So he opened up his closet, and there was a false wall, and he opened up the false wall, and here was all these cubbies, these little cubbies, and inside was rolled up Tonka paintings. He had a whole wall of these Tonka paintings. And he started pulling them out, and he was hanging them on the closet door, which was right by a window, it had really good natural light. And I'm photographing these Tonka paintings and literally blowing my mind. The detail, just everything about it, just the depth of it, and just kept coming. It was like waves just coming. And so finally I said, "What what is this? What were we looking at here?" He said, "Meditation. This is meditation. We use this for meditation." And okay, well, that's pretty interesting. So these impressions just stayed with me, because it just kind of not really knowing how it fit into the programming of anything, but definitely there. Like behind me, you see a Tonka painting.
Hmm.
This is a pretty nice one too, by the way.
Yeah, very
I,
beautiful. Yeah.
I bought that in Nepal. But so I don't know, this stuff just stayed with me, and it was somehow it was operating with me, and, of course, I was going about my work, and like I said, we ended up moving to New York, and I got interested in Gurdjieff, at one point and went to some sessions. One of his Gurdjieff students, this guy Nyland, had a little community up north of New York City, and he would come down once a week to this apartment on the Upper East Side, and the apartment all it had in the apartment was about 50 folding chairs and a piano. That was it. And then so this group of people would gather, and Nyland would come in and he would start playing the piano. And then they would start talking about the work, which was Gurdjieff. So I was seeking things out. I didn't really know what I was looking for. I just knew that there was more to it. And every time I would have those kinds of encounters, there would be this residual that just stuck with me. And I could see that it was changing my view. I could see it in my work, in my sculpture. I could see it in my drawing. There was something internal at work there that I didn't understand, but I trusted, seemed trustable, seemed beautiful. So I'm seeing New York in a kind of a different way. I'm walking the streets. I love just walking the streets in New York. I had a dog. It was a good excuse to get out and walk around. Also, you'd find a newspaper, in every garbage can. And when the dog would go to the bathroom on the sidewalk, you'd scoop it up with a newspaper out of a trash can, right? So half the time I'm walking around with a handful of dog shit, and I thought, well, if I get mugged out here, somebody's gonna be really surprised. But that didn't happen. You know, one of those things. So then ended up moving to New Mexico and got some property there and built a studio and got involved in a very rural. We basically restored an old coal mining town up in the mountains just outside of Santa Fe. They had a bunch of properties there, and they brought in some realtors, and they were selling. They had all these prefabricated miners' houses and whatever, and I bought an old hotel building there and then started restoring that, and it was a real community effort, about 15 years. Had my studio there and then did the community work and whatever, and there was a Tibetan temple in Santa Fe, and I went there a few times, but it didn't really grab me. I don't know why. It just turned out it was a Gelugpa tradition. I didn't know that much about it at the time. Anyway, it came to Galveston. My wife wanted to put her daughter in a school here in Galveston, and so we moved down to Galveston, and she started a yoga studio. And one night we went out to dinner with a couple of her yoga students and went back over to the studio, and the gal grabbed a book off the shelf and said, "You need to read this book." And it was Lama Surya Das's book, Awakening the Buddha Within. And I was just getting ready to head back up to New Mexico, working on a project up there. So I just took the book with me. And so I'm up in the studio, and my studio was a solar heated, had the beautiful views of the Rio Grande Valley. It was like perfect place to work and to meditate. And so I'm reading this book, and this is really cool. It was so personal. It was so immediately kind of engaging. And I noticed at the back of the book, it said Lama Surya Das did retreats, and he could come to these public retreats. And so we found the number for the Dzogchen Center group in Boston. And I called up and I didn't know who I was talking to. I said, I'm reading this book and I saw where you guys do these retreats. What do you have to do to go to these retreats? She said, well, first thing you have to do is sign up. So I ended up as New Year's Eve, flew into Boston and then had a 10-day retreat with Lama Surya. And it was all on the floor, and I'd never really sat, zazen style on the floor. I just usually just sat on a couch or something. And so I got kind of worried that, well, I don't think I can do this for 10 days. And so I wrote a note to somebody. I said, hey, I don't think I can do this for 10 days. Just here, meet me at such and such a room. Went up. Here's this beautiful gal. And she said, you're not going to have any trouble. You're fine. So I picked a cushion where I could lean against the wall if I had to, right? And it'll be up real close to the front. And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. Lama Surya's approach was just so direct and filled with humor and very personal insights. So this was like 90, 94. And so I ended up basically going everywhere he went for the next 10 years. Did a 100-day retreat, did retreats all over the country. I met some extraordinary people during the retreats, people who I'm still quite intimate friends with today. Ended up at one point, Lama Surya asked me to handle his jail mail because his books were so popular. He got a lot of mail from inmates, and he didn't know quite what to do with it. And I was kind of doing a bookstore as part of the retreats, and I was helping to organize the retreats, kind of helping people register. I got kind of involved with the organization. And so I said, okay, that sounds fine. And so he would send me his letters, and then I would usually send him a little letter, thank you for your interest, and, then send him a book or whatever. Well, I got this one letter from an inmate over in Beaumont, Texas. I'm in Galveston at this point, saying, is there somebody who can come and give us a Dharma talk? So I called Surya and I said, hey, we got a letter from an inmate here that wants someone to come give him a Dharma talk. And Surya said, yeah, you should do that. It's a big deal, to teach in the Tibetan lineage. It's a big deal. And I said, really? I mean, yeah, he said, definitely. You should go do that. So I did. I went over and there was 12 guys showed up for a Dharma talk. And at the end of the talk, 2 or 3 of the guys were crying. I mean, there was like tears running down their face. Oh my God, what, I thought like screwed up or something. I mean, did I say something? They said, oh no, it's the first time we've ever heard the Dharma. Then I started crying because it was just very, very touching, so intimate. And so I ended up going over there every week. I'd leave home about 5:30 in the morning, get over there by 7:30, 2-hour drive over to Beaumont. And then end up kind of working most of the day. I was like doing the classes. We started an ethics class that we offered to everyone on the unit. And then the ethics class was bringing people because we're doing meditation as part of that, using the Dalai Lama's book, Ethics for a New Millennium. We actually wrote a study guide. The inmate group did an outline for a study guide for his book, and we offered that as a class. And
Wonderful.
so we're getting a lot of people. Well, then we were also doing our regular weekly meditation, and we're basically in a classroom in the part of the chapel area of the prison. And we got so many people coming to meditation that we had to move into the sanctuary, the kind of big church part. Well, the evangelical volunteers lost their shit. Having these pagan Buddhists in our church, I mean, it major freak out. And they made it so
Amazing.
difficult, I had to leave.
Mm.
This is East Texas. They say, oh, you've heard about the Bible Belt? Well, this is the buckle. And
That's right. That's right.
and so I ended up going over to the Ramsey unit just outside of Houston and just working with a group there and some other prisons too around. Had prison, about 5 different prisons I'd go to like once a month. But I started going over the Ramsey unit and we started a faith-based dorm on the Ramsey unit. And I called it a contemplative practice program because by law, it couldn't be just a Christian dorm. It had to be open to all denominations, any faith, all faiths. That's just part of the whole RLUIPA Supreme Court decision on public property that was passed in the 90s. So we started a faith-based dorm over there, and it was great. I mean, we would have classes all day, 4 days a week. It brought in a lot of volunteers. It was all volunteer taught. teaching cognitive intervention, finances, as well as meditation and acknowledging Christian meditation. We brought in a guy that was a Christian meditation guy, and then different people coming in and doing services and whatever. And I was working with the chaplain over there at that time that was a Catholic deacon and super guy. And he was very open to my work and what I did, and he was very open to the whole faith-based Dharma. I became what's called a CVCA. It's a Certified Volunteer Chaplain's Assistant.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like a ticket, it's I can basically work as a chaplain, which I continue to do to today. I still go over the Ramsey unit twice a week.
Wow, wonderful. Very
And
wonderful.
even though I'm no longer in charge of the dorm, I'm still teaching classes in the dorm. And so that was really wonderful. And then in the meantime, the Dalai Lama wrote a different book called Beyond Religion on ethics. So we went through with some of the original guys from Styles. We went through and rewrote the study guide, and the Dalai Lama Foundation gave us a grant to publish that. And so
Wow.
that's what we use for the faith-based dorm courses, is the Beyond Religion text of His Holiness, and then the little study guide that we put together for it. And then I also teach a contemplative practice, a little book that I wrote, for that. And yeah, so that brings us pretty much up to date.
Great. Well, I'm going to say some stuff and ask you some questions. I just want to, in my mind, replay everything I heard. So, and please correct me if I say something incorrectly. So, sensing you as a child being out in nature, it sounds like the sensitivity that you were experiencing nature. It wasn't just like, oh, look, there's a tree. It seemed like you were having a very intimate or connection with nature. And then you had these realizations like, oh, wow, if I died and I become part of this. And so you were aware of this bigger picture is one thing I heard from my sense really clearly. And then you started being exposed to concepts and traditions and beliefs and systems and things of Buddhism and other practices. And then you met a Buddhist teacher who I imagine, you can correct me again if I'm wrong, when you were in his presence, there was probably a vibration of love and awareness and wisdom that was alive and real.
And humor.
And humor. Yeah, yeah.
Humor.
Always, to me, it's always part of the
Yeah,
divine tickle, the divine.
Yeah, which is also the thing about Surya too, is that his humor was so engaging, so accurate, so spot on. Yeah.
So then when you were in, say, his presence, that vibration affected you and you experienced that. And then I guess my first question would be, so identifying as separate from nature, from God, from source, whatever somebody like to call it, what are the ways that you have found to take these concepts and experiences with being with the teacher or other things and actually internally going on some kind of journey where you have practices that have made this more of your experience of who you are or how you experience life? How have you worked internally with that?
So I understand awakening, being awake, as being appropriate with reality. And so I think the fact that my parents were both artists, you're really capturing the spirit of something as a painter or sculpture or whatever. And so that sensitivity to the nature of nature, right, kind of how nature worked, was quite deep. I mean, my influences were pretty profound in that way. I mean, at one point, I went through a whole dying. I saw my death dissolving into the forest, into the floor of the forest, just my body decomposing and going in, and then the bugs and the critters and the plants. I mean, I was like 12 years old, so I don't know. So this thing with nature, having this connection with nature. And so our challenge is having integrity with the nature of nature, being appropriate in terms of reality. And when we're not appropriate with reality, we suffer. When we're out of integrity in that sense, then we suffer. So that connection is both very subtle and also very obvious. And I feel like I was very fortunate to have the experiences, my life experiences that I've had as a very young child, all the way through being grounded in nature.
So I'm going to ask you a question after I say this. So when you're in nature, for you, it's just so natural to be one with nature because you were raised with that in the environment, your parents, and maybe just like your spirit, that was something that was just home for you. Like you just felt, this is me. And then let's say, for example, that today, if you're living in an apartment in New York City and you can never leave and see nature, how would you internally connect to that place as if you were in nature? How do you nurture that in yourself without the nature being around you.
Well, I tell you, the nature of New York City is awesome.
It's true. I live there. It is true.
It's
Let's pretend there
awesome.
were no windows and no nature, and you were just in
Oh,
a room.
well, I had this third floor loft, on 23rd Street, half a block down from the Flatiron Building, across from the park. And I mean, I could see people in the building across the street, and every once in a while we kind of acknowledge each other. Like we all had our little caves. We're all living in our little caves in these mountains and these canyons, these extraordinary canyons with light and sound moving through them. New York was, I thought the nature of New York was awesome,
Yeah,
and
I experienced that too.
it's all human, it's all manufactured, but nature is so fully present there. That's what blew
Hmm.
my mind. I thought you had to be like in a mountain or something,
Yeah, yeah.
like up on a stream fly fishing or something. I thought, that's nature. Now I'm in
Hmm.
nature. But New York, it blew my mind, man. It just,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just thought it was extraordinarily beautiful.
Yeah, I love being there, and I remember sitting in the subway because I lived there for a few years after university, and I remember just looking and being like, "Wow, there's people on here from everywhere in the world," and it just felt so interconnected. I love that.
Polyglot and, every language you can hear
Yeah, to me,
and
that was super special.
every accent and everything, yeah, yeah. The smells, everything about it was
Yeah, it
what
was very
what it
very
got.
alive place, very alive. So with your practices in Buddhism, if you were to only be able to teach somebody one, two, three practices to help them learn to connect to the deepest place in them, whatever you or someone may call that. And then if there are only one or two, three practices, whatever number feels right for you, that you could teach us how people can deal with the things that seem to interfere with them connecting to that in themselves.
Yeah, I think it's kind of surprisingly obvious and simultaneously difficult. The biggest challenge is being at peace with ourselves. It has to start there. So, like with a child, they're pretty much naturally at peace with themselves, and so you just see the spirit of a child immediately, don't you? I mean, you just feel their vibrancy, their enthusiasm, their spontaneity. But when we hit teenage years and, we become sensitive to social pressures and popular issues and whatever, we kind of get trained from the outside in to be judgmental.
Hmm.
And so the beauty of practice is that we are giving ourselves permission to just be still, just sit still and observe how we are. Just observe it. I mean, in the simplest terms, Jonathan, I'd have to say that not judging the judging. And if we can do that, if we can just have that kind of equanimity with ourselves, then the peace is there. It's
Hmm.
the peace is already present. We're the only ones that's interfering with that, just out of habit. It's just a mode of being, that
Hmm.
seems okay. That seems will definitely serves us in many ways, where we're discerning the value of things and making choices. I mean, that's part of it. That's certainly a big part of it. But when we don't afford ourselves the opportunity to just be still and look in without judging, just seeing ourselves just as we are, not how we think we should be or could be or were that's pretty much the essence of it, I think. I think that's the main skill.
So would that be if somebody was sitting, or if we're sitting right now, you and I and anyone listening, and we're just inwardly observing for what's happening and not identifying with what's happening, but more with the observer. And if a judgment comes up, just letting it go, or being happy that we remembered to come back. And as you do that more, the depth and breadth of you identifying with the witness becomes stronger, and the detaching from or not being as identified with what you're witnessing becomes stronger or weaker as far as identifying with those things. So the observer gets stronger. Is that the practice? Am I sharing it in a way that would sound with integrity to what you're sharing?
Yeah, no, it definitely has integrity. I would put less emphasis on like a witnessing
Hmm.
because that's like something here and something there. It's just here. Whatever is just here. So it's just being, not so much witnessing, just being. So uh, our essence is awareness.
Hmm.
The very essence of our being is awareness.
Hmm.
There's nothing apart from that. There's nothing separate from awareness. So if I'm giving myself permission just to be awareness, I'm just being awareness. That's all whatever awareness is, I'm just being that. So there's no really sense of I doing this or that, or
Hmm.
that being this or that. It's just whatever is, just as it is. right, is the most helpful, because then there's nothing to identify a witness or nothing to identify anything. There's no need to identify anything. It's just experiencing whatever it is, just as it is, right? I don't have to label it.
How would you, if you would, even right now, how would you lead the listeners through a short version of what you're saying?
Well, I think it's helpful just to begin with arriving. I begin all my classes, my meditation at the prison with "Let's arrive, let's arrive," and I'll run into guys that I had 10 years ago in the dorm, and they'll go, "I'm arriving, I'm
Yes,
arriving."
good. That's wonderful. Yeah.
So I know that there's a little bit of tenacity there, right?
Hmm.
A little bit of stickiness there that
Yeah.
might be helpful. So just invite ourselves just to arrive, just to be exactly where we are in this moment. And we do that by breathing. The Vipassana approach is unparalleled in terms of introducing meditation. Anyone who's not familiar with meditation should definitely take a 10-day Vipassana retreat. I mean, they have that down to a fine art. So
Mm.
we do that briefly, just in terms of breathing, experiencing the sensation of breathing, the body filling, and then the body nourishing and itself, and then the releasing is the body relaxing itself. So what we're doing is just bringing our awareness to how we are, just being aware of just how we are, just sitting and breathing, right? And then we can just go from there. Just thoughts will come and go, just like the breath is coming and going. And we don't have to hold on to anything, just like we can hold the breath for a while, but eventually we have to let it go because that's the nature of things. So any thought, any feeling, any sensation we experience, it has that nature. When I said before, awakening is integrity with reality, right? Integrity with nature.
Mm.
That's what awakening is. Having integrity with how things are, right? And so the awakened one is one that's in integrity with reality. So as we're awakening, we're inviting ourselves to just be aware of just how we are, breathing, sitting, relaxing, aware of sensation, aware of thoughts and feeling, but we're aware of how they're coming and going.
Mm.
We're not aware of them in an analytical way. We're not aware of them so much as an identification, as a label, as an answer, as a solution. It's just a thought. It's just a feeling, an insight, right? And as we have the insight is then having kind of recognizing there's a little bit of a pattern to how I think. Well, that's what I do, kind of I notice I have an insight, like, of being a little bit judgmental,
Mm.
being of myself or others or whatever. I just noticed that, right? Of, kind of maybe holding on to having a little edge, the negativity, having a little negativity. I'm just noticing this, right, without judging. So, yeah, just sitting, breathing, relaxing, and being just as we are. That's our meditation.
Yeah, I love that. I remember years ago seeing on TV Oprah Winfrey interviewing Thich Nhat Hanh, just so beautifully and naturally and childlike, and just the effervescence of his beauty and innocence and purity and childlike qualities were just so powerful. And
Absolutely.
it was so simple, just like you're saying. Anytime I read anything of his, it's so simple. And I know the human mind and many spiritual systems get very complex, and there's so much doing and deciphering and things that I think in some ways I understand how maybe it serves a purpose for certain people in certain times, but in some ways it complicates the integrity of nature and integrity of reality. So I do see in an experience for myself and many people I work with and many people I speak to on this podcast, this simplicity of what we're talking about. But I'm also curious because I've experienced it in myself and working with a lot of people through the years, people with mental illnesses, maybe when you're in prison dealing with that. And, when you have these moments that really impact you. I remember years ago, one of my students who many things we're talking about, I teach people all ages in different ways. And they had been with me for a long time. And after at some point, they went to a therapist and got on medication for their OCD and anxiety. And they came back to me and said, now I'm able to hear what you're saying and do what you're saying. I couldn't before. The disturbance was too loud, too strong, too powerful. And so I'm curious within these traditions of, say, Tibetan Buddhism, different traditions that have such a deep practice and so much experience with time and people, how do these things kind of get addressed where if someone just feels I'm completely blinded, I can't even do what you're saying, just just be, because this intensity of the whatever that is, the thoughts, the emotions, how do you work with that?
Yeah, good question. Well, I see a pretty broad range in the prison, and that's a pretty overwhelming experience for someone. And you see the difference between, guys that have been down for 10, 15, 20 years, and guys that are newer at it. And I see so much tenderness there. I see so much, it's like immediately recognizable. A little bit experience, it's immediately recognizable. Somebody's really having a hard time. And there's just a lot of love there, man. There's a lot of love there, and I think in any situation, it's the love that's gonna make the difference, and the challenge is loving ourselves. I see love as equanimity, right? Where I have no attitude with you other than love, and love is all embracing. It's all encompassing. It doesn't rule anything out. It's unqualified, unconditional. So if we're gonna say that's kind of the goal, right?
Hmm.
Is having that degree of equanimity with ourselves and with each other.
Mm.
When I was helping Surya, working with them in the retreats, I mean, we would see people come through retreats who, overpowering. And
Hmm.
as much as he would use humor, and really, it was his skillfulness with humor that could just cut through
Mm.
a lot of that anxiety. He could make a joke
Hmm.
about anything. That's a gift.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely, definitely.
there's a genius there. There really is.
Yeah, no question. I think it's an aliveness. There's somebody doing something in a certain way, and
Yeah,
then that human being is alive and responding naturally from it, going back to that integrity. There's something of
yeah,
this is matching that in
yeah,
the way that's appropriate. And it's not
yeah.
someone trying to do something. I think
It's
it's,
your question is how do we relax, right?
well,
I mean, these people are unable to hear you.
yeah.
They they couldn't relax this mind that was churning.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this just from my own personal experience. So, in my family, like genetically, there's OCD and anxiety. And so I've worked with this for decades within myself. And I have a lot of self management tools that I've done that have changed how I identify with myself. So, if that is happening, I can most of the time, like you're saying, just see it for what it is. But I've experienced where that feels like that's all there is. And I know my experience is probably way more mild than many people's. And I've seen people like bipolar people or people with extreme OCD. And so answer your question, yes, to relax. And it seems like there's something driving this energy that's so all consuming that, I mean, the only thing I can see with the relaxation, because I do a lot of work with people using our bodies, is using the body to calm the mind, because I think that's the quickest way in many ways. So I could definitely see that. But I guess I was just curious, and maybe that is within Tibetan Buddhism, they have that of like how do they help people that have extreme, it's not just like, oh, my mind's driving me crazy with thoughts. It's like, no, this is all consuming all the time other than when I'm sleeping.
Well, one of the preliminary practices is called the Nindro. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's connecting with the guru, right? And in this case, it's Guru Rinpoche, who's the founder of it. And the Nindro is a 108 line practice where you're throwing yourself down in prostrations, right? 108, boom,
Mm.
boom, boom. And then repeating the slokas with each prostration. And I mean, that cuts through a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I can see that. That makes sense because it's physical and mental, and you're doing something with the energy, and then
Exactly.
eventually it
Exactly.
settles.
You
Yeah, it's
have
beautiful.
you've got to be you're paying attention on just about every level, you know?
Yeah, that
It's
makes sense. That's beautiful because again, it's integrating the mind, body, and spirit. It's not just saying, "Oh, don't think those thoughts," or just witness. It's like,
yeah,
no, that's all consuming.
yeah,
But if you use physicality with your mental and emotional intention,
yeah.
it could help the energy work through.
So in the prison, I've kind of adapted that in terms of this breathing exercise, this arriving, right? Just really emphasize the kind of the Vipassana, experiencing sensation, just all the whole sensation of breathing and just kind of doing that for a while. And you're nourishing, you're releasing, you're relaxing. All this is going on with your breathing, each breath. So it's a much more modified, it's kind of a nundro in the sense of there's not really a shloka, attached to the inhale. There is an Anindra. Each part of it has a line or a sloka with it, but it's more just bringing the awareness to the body and just noticing where there's tension and tightness, noticing where there's any sensation. So it just kind of depends on the situation. In a certain context, you're able to do it this way, but in other contexts, there's no one solution there.
So a few things come to my mind right now. So one is if you're just sitting with your breath and being with your breath and being in your body, things just start to settle naturally. If somebody feels that what's happening is all consuming and that is very difficult for them to do, like beyond, they just can't do it, then maybe doing something with the movement, like you're saying, incorporating some type of moving or prostration that you're talking about. And then maybe whether it's from a guru or whatever, maybe filling up the inhale and the exhale with some kind of meaningful words that, whether it's a mantra or what it may be in your tradition, right? Something that maybe could focus their mind
Mhm.
with their breath in their body.
As you're very much aware, I'm sure, there are so many different traditional approaches to
Hmm.
just this question. How do we kind of get out of ourselves a little bit
Hmm.
or get more into ourselves, maybe another way
Hmm.
to say it, right? Because there's resistance both ways. There's resistance
Hmm.
going out and then there's resistance going in.
Hmm.
But traditionally, different traditions, as you're saying, have certainly aware of this and are addressing it.
Hmm.
I think if someone's really interested in this, probably one of the best things you could do is a 10-day Vipassana retreat.
Hmm. Okay.
I mean, it's it's so disciplined, so
Hmm.
you can only go this far, you can't go beyond this boundary. The men and
Hmm.
women can't talk, they sit on opposite sides of the hall, they eat
Hmm.
separately. There's no meal after noon like just like a traditional monastic retreat, Vipassana,
Hmm.
like a
Hmm.
Winkin style
Yeah.
Vipassana retreat.
Mm.
I've done several, and it's fantastic, man. You just sit. You
Yeah, I've
just
heard. Yeah, yeah, it sounds wonderful.
sit. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
you couldn't ask for anything better. The food is good, and the accommodations are always very nice, and it's very
Wow.
professionally done, and, I mean, if you need to talk to a teacher, there's a teacher you can talk to. I think it's an amazing resource. I mean,
Hmm.
I've never been to a Vipassana retreat that wasn't absolutely full.
Mm. That's amazing. It's wonderful to hear. It's almost like spiritual boot camp in a very positive way. Like it's giving you
Exactly.
the roots to go out and do your work.
Exactly. I mean, if you can slice out 10 days, take 10 days out of your schedule to just go and sit,
Hmm.
and they don't charge you for them. So I tell
Wow.
inmates, I said, "When you get out of here, go sit Vipassana for 10 days."
Yeah,
You got a free
that's
meal, you got a
great.
place to sleep.
Wonderful.
I mean, they ask for a donation. The whole
Hmm.
system is based upon, dana, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. Really wonderful. So for anyone listening, if they have the ability to do that, that sounds like the number one thing to do. And if they don't, then any way they could do that in their life from just sitting and breathing and being. And if you need to add physicality and then stop the physicality and just be with your breathing.
They're usually located in kind of beautiful situation, kind of, out in nature, and it'll be the best vacation you ever give yourself.
I hear you. How would you describe, I know you said equanimity a lot. How would you describe for you what it feels like for you to be, what words would you call it in your soul and your spirit and God and love and equanimity? How would you, whatever words you want to use, but how would you describe what it feels like for you, like inside you?
Well, of course, the Brahma Viharas, the oldest spiritual text we know of, the Rig Veda, the pre-Hindu Rig Veda, is a kind of semi-literary, but it has in it, I mean, what's been our challenge historically that's key to our survival is having integrity with reality. So that means I see this plant, I'm out foraging, right? I see this plant, and I want to know is that if I eat that plant, is that going to be beneficial or harmful? Will it be healthy? Will it be unhealthy? Give me the runs or something or worse, or kill me. Will it be deadly? I need to have that reality. Me having the reality of anything is absolutely essential. So how do I identify then that quality? What's the quality of the root, the stem, the leaf, the seed, the bloom of that plant? These different parts, and everything has maybe has a different like bitter, sour, sweet, whatever. So our earliest communication is learning to identify what's helpful and what's harmful.
Hmm.
And that communication was basically identifying the spirit of a thing, of a plant, of a seed, of a nut, of an animal, or whatever,
Hmm.
helpful or harmful, right? So the Rig Veda, by the time of the Rig Veda, it's about
Mm,
1400. I would rather us tell time in terms of the Common Era, which would be 3000 BC, the first evidence of literature, right?
mm,
So you add 3000 BC to today. So this is about 1400 before the Common Era. And they're identifying what is the essential spirit of our humanity.
mm,
And this has been the conversation all along, hasn't it? The spirit of a man, the spirit of a woman, the spirit of a child, the spirit of a warrior, the spirit of a healer, the spirit of an artist. But what's the full picture of our humanity? What qualities would we give to our humanity? And the four Brahma Viharas, Brahma is our human spirit, and Vihara is qualities. They came up with love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So
mhm,
love is the wish for all of us to be happy. Compassion is the action of love for us to not suffer. And joy is the experience of love. Equanimity is our ability to experience that. So in the Buddhist tradition, this becomes wisdom and compassion. The
mm,
Brahmaviharas are kind of boiled down to wisdom and compassion. Compassion being the action of love, the love component. Wisdom being the equanimity component.
mm,
For wisdom, there has to be equanimity. I have to be able to see things accurately. I have to have a balanced view. So that's the wisdom.
mm. Do you feel in some ways that people see it, the wisdom as from your head and the compassion from your heart and your body, or is it the wisdom, compassion both ways?
I think it comes from all sources. I
Mm,
think to say that, oh, the head because of the brain,
mm.
we don't have to associate the brain with wisdom. I mean, there's
The body's super wise.
yeah, the brain is just a processing equipment. It's the most sophisticated thing we know of in the universe. All of our technology today is raging to try and emulate the brain. The conversation is that that's the most powerful thing. Well, give credit where credit's due, but the heart quality is the love, isn't it? It's the
Mhm,
compassion.
mhm.
So there's no wisdom without compassion,
Yeah,
and there's
I
no
hear that.
compassion without wisdom.
Right on, right on. If you think back to when you were that child out in Montana in nature and feeling one with nature to your experience today of just being, do they seem very similar? Just
Oh yeah,
time has passed? Yeah.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like the same way living in New York, living in New Mexico, living in Oregon, we're surrounded by nature is what it is. I
Hmm.
mean, it's all nature.
Yeah.
And of course, tradition tells us that for us, we know nature as awareness. So our challenge is not so much to try and be anything other than exactly what we are.
Beautiful. Very right on. If there was something that you've seen and learned from people that are in prison that you think people are not in prison could really learn from if they're able to hear it and implement it, is there anything that you think would be some wisdom and some compassion from within the prisons and the inmates that you've experienced?
Yeah, good question. I've learned a lot from prison. Probably the most powerful thing in my practice has been working in the prison.
Mm,
I see more love behind that fence than I mean, I see love everywhere. I mean, we can experience love
mhm,
everywhere, can't we? Just somebody giving us a
mhm,
smile, somebody let us going ahead in line, or letting us go first at a
mm,
stop sign, or there's gestures of love everywhere we turn. But you rarely see it to the depth that you see it in a prison. Now I know people say, "Well, oh no, I mean they're all evil and hostile and hateful and deviants and all that." Yeah, okay, that's been their life for sure. But I'm
mm,
still telling you that there's more love in prison than there is just about anywhere else.
mm,
And people that work in the prison, it's very challenging. I have
mhm,
tremendous compassion for the officers in the prison because they're
mm,
trained to not show any kind of favoritism. They're
mm,
trained to exert discipline. They represent the system. They represent society. They represent what's right and how things are. They're authority. They have authority.
mhm,
Authority is dangerous. It's dulling. It's deadly
mm,
because you have to kind of deny who you are to be who I am,
mhm. Yep.
right? So I have tremendous compassion for officers in the prison, and I tell you, some of them handle it so skillfully.
Mm,
They're just so even. They just have the same touch with everything they're doing. Some of them have to like really kind of get up and be all this and all that.
mhm,
The most experienced ones are the ones that have learned to just be themselves. You're just another person there,
mm.
and just because you have gray on and they have white on, they know that you're in charge. You don't have to keep being in charge all the
Yeah.
That's a given.
Hmm.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
it's a nice dose of reality. A prison is a nice dose of reality. I'm in it for the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever thought as far as why there's more love in prison? Is it the circumstance and maybe the people just that happen to be there? Is it combination?
In prison, you're never more than 4 feet away from another person 24/7. Think about that.
Wow. Wow.
Think about that. That has an effect. You learn to make your own space. You learn to have your own space, and you learn to respect the space of others. It's essential. You can't survive without that. So the life lessons in prison are pretty important. I mean, I personally don't think there should ever be a prison sentence more than 10 years. They've learned their 10 years, they've learned what they need to know. For most of them, even less than that. But I had a young man, he was on the street when he was 5. He was on the street
Wow.
exclusively. I mean, he had a home he could kinda go to, exclusively on his own at 8 years old. He's on the streets in Houston.
Wow.
The CPS had picked him up a couple of times, placed him in a home. And the homes he got placed in, the only thing they were interested in was the check they got at the end of the month for taking care of a foster kid.
Mm.
So there's no action there, no love there, but there was love with the gang. The gang showed him love. That's where he found his
Mm.
was with the gang.
Community. Yeah.
Yeah. 15 years old, he's in prison. Capital
Mm.
murder.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and a beautiful man, beautiful guy.
Mm.
I mean,
Mm.
just so intense and so
Mm.
like really. He just got paroled 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
30 years. 30 years down. No, no. He didn't need 30 years.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, he had to kill somebody, otherwise he wouldn't have survived the gang. Everybody's got a story.
Very intense. Very
Yeah,
intense.
very.
Yeah. Yeah. In your tradition, or you personally, how would you describe the purpose of human life?
Well, we haven't always been here, and we're not always gonna be here. We need to know that. There have been 3 catastrophic events on Earth where pretty much almost all the known life has been eliminated. We're latecomers to Earth, and we're doing our best to destroy it. So, do I think humans are gonna be around forever? No, I don't. I really don't. I think we're gonna have another catastrophic event. Could be a
Mm.
CME, could be another asteroid, could be a nuclear holocaust, creating a nuclear winter. I don't mean to be pessimistic here. I'm just
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
just being realistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but we have everything we need to be totally at peace, totally enjoy. And we've had moments like this in history where there was a pretty idyllic society. We really lived in peace. Some of our earliest settlements, Talinsky in Ukraine and in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, 5, 6, 8,000 years, and where we've had, pretty stable societies. Our earliest existence was pretty pastoral cooperation. There was no need for empire. There was no need for patriarchy. There was no need for a lot of the things that we have very much in evidence today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a Native American senior on here once, and when he was speaking about how they lived in nature and the sensitivity to animals and each other, it just sounded like he said that some of the settlers came and said, "This is like heaven on earth." He said, "This is what we've been looking for." And I think it's so common in humanity to run around and sprint and try to prove things and dominate and be in control instead of relaxing into our true nature, which would be we're a human community and we're here to enjoy and celebrate and work together this miracle. I mean, this whole thing is such a miracle how any of it's
Unbe
happened and happening. And
Unbelievable.
somehow, when I asked somebody this question about purpose of life, they said to experience life fully. And I thought that was really beautiful too, because what an opportunity we're given and
And to do
to be
that,
able to slow down. Yeah.
we have to be willing to experience ourselves fully. So that's our meditation, just fully experiencing just exactly how we are. My father's secretary at the university, her husband was a professor of anthropology, and of course his specialty was Native American. And she got him to ask me to go with him on a field trip where he was studying the Blackfeet uh, people up in northeastern Montana. And so we went. At one point, we had to cross the Missouri River on a raft that was being pulled on a cable. It was a
Mm.
ferry. It was the only way you could get across the river. I mean, it was
Wow.
really, really remote. And so we got up there, and there's a bunch of lodges around, but also a big pavilion. It was the Bureau of Indian Affairs had a big pavilion that they'd built up there. It had an office up there, and they were going to conduct. There was some of the elders were the last ones that had personally experienced the deer dance, and so they were gonna do that. It was gonna be a week-long ceremony, and, so I went up with Vernon Dusenberry and his family, and, the deer dance is capturing the spirit of the deer. Before you actually kill the deer, there has to be this kind of conversation. At least that's
Mhm.
how I understood it then.
You
So
shared that with me, yeah.
yeah, it's 24 hours ceremonial and all night dancing, and then day was doing ritual, like going out and foraging and
Mm,
whatever. But so the all night dancing, and then the drums are just the giant drums with like 8 guys at the same time doing the same drum. And I was in junior high school, I guess, and just completely blown away by this. And this woman came up to me and she said, "Would you like to join the dance?" And I said, "Is that okay?" And she says, "Yeah, yeah." And so she had a whole buckskin trousers and had bells on the bottom and bells on the wrist. And so she had a whole outfit. It was her son's. And she dressed me. She got me, put me in a whole outfit and pushed me out on the floor. So I danced for like 8 hours. It was like,
wow.
it was so that spirit, that Native American spirit is one of the greatest treasures in this country.
Mm,
And our treatment of Native Americans is
mm,
sad, sad chapter. Really is.
yeah.
But anyway, that was quite an amazing experience.
Yeah, and even when you're saying that, when I said about to experience life fully in that moment of the drums and the chanting, the singing and the dancing and being in nature, it's right there as a beautiful example of living fully and putting your heart and soul into the moment, into your body, into your breathing, into your community and doing good and having respect and integrity for yourself, others, and nature. The simple foundational things of humanity that show our beauty and our goodness are always the same.
Captured in that moment, exactly what you're saying, all that captured in that ceremonial. So
Yeah.
that's gonna carry over into the society. That spirit is just not about the deer, is it? That's about our humanity, just as you're saying. So that's gonna inform the whole community, the whole society. The women are cooking and whatever, and the men are going and doing what they're doing, and I mean, everyone's has knows exactly what their place is, what their part is, and exactly who each other is. Very, very cool stuff.
Yeah, I think one thing that I look at sometimes is when I look at politics or power, and the thing that I always get to is that humanity has a weakness with power. And if somebody's in power that doesn't have incredible humility and compassion and wisdom, it's super dangerous. And it seems like it always should be whatever the field is, you should have a wise person learning the skill set for that field, whether it's politics or business or teaching at school, whatever it is have people that have naturally or been trained in love and compassion and wisdom and then they learn that skill set. And I think somehow it just became learn a skill set or learn to be power monger or whatever it is and control things. And it doesn't matter always if you're a person of love and compassion and wisdom. It just matters that you're controlling. And I think if we all as human beings look at ourselves and connect to some kind of code of love and wisdom and honor or whatever that may be, and live that way with ourselves, with our family, with our work, whatever we're doing, that vibration, just like you were talking about the dance with the deer and all, like that quality reverberates out and in. And I think that is the opportunity of humanity. And then the flip side is falling from grace, for lack of better words, of doing the opposite and forgetting our human family.
Well, again, coming back, I think that's exactly right, what you're saying. It's just by the sheer mass of population, so much of this has been institutionalized. And it's kind of like the officer that doesn't know how to handle their authority, in a prison. The institution becomes its
Hmm.
own identity. It's no longer
Hmm.
sees itself in relation with or responsible to something else.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's a problem of scale. I think it's a
Hmm.
problem of education, personally. I
Hmm.
mean, we need to take education a lot more seriously,
Hmm.
not just in terms of getting a good job and increasing the economy and coming up with new widgets. My partner's grandson just graduated Montessori school last weekend, and so we went to the graduation, and, I mean, they had caps and gowns. These 5-year-olds
Wow.
wearing
Wow.
caps and gowns, and all the parents were there, and they were singing they had all these songs that they sang, and they went across the stage and got their diplomas, and it was like, we're actually doing something here.
Hmm.
This matters, right? And then I was
Yeah.
part of this baccalaureate ceremony at the high school here in Galveston. I sit with a ministerial group, and they sponsor stuff because I'm a chaplain. They let me come sit with them, and it was this real engagement with family and students. And you just think, gosh, I wish we could do this every week, something like this every week, or
Hmm.
maybe once a month, maybe
Hmm.
even just 3 or 4 times a year. I mean, not just one. Yeah, because what we were experiencing there is a real sense of community, aren't we? Community means common unity, that which is unifying us. And to have these moments of community, I mean, that's the thing about the
Hmm.
prison, real sense of community there.
Hmm.
There's a real body at work there. And so often now, all these different
All the
subcategories
labels.
of
Yeah.
humans, and that defines you. That's the definitive thing
Hmm.
with you.
Well, that was one of the main motivations for me for this podcast was to have people that have incredible spiritual depth and to share their practice and to see how each practice is unique and way more in common as far as what we're all seeking and wanting and what it comes down to so many times is that humility, that wisdom, that love, that presence, that beingness. And we all want that. We've been very brainwashed to how to get it. And I think a lot of people have the opportunity to go, wait a second, this thing I was told somewhere that would bring me to it doesn't work. Let me find something else. But if we could just start from the get go of, hey, here is the foundation of how to live in schools and find your career, find your passion, your path. But most importantly, know how to live. I think that would really make a big change. So,
Well, finding community, really making it about the community. A few years ago, we were in Bogaya, and we ended up I was there with one of my other teachers, and this Thai nun, Thai Buddhist nun. All the different schools have monasteries at Bodh every different Buddhist sect school, and this Thai nun, who was actually a former, Olympic athlete, and she ran into a couple of people in our group and got to talking to them and found out we were there with one of our teachers, and so she came over the next morning, had her bowl with her and everything. She said, "I wanna take you on a tour," and, so we got a little bus, and then we just started going around to all these different monasteries. And we went to one of the Japanese monastery, and when we got there, we're looking around, whatever, and we heard this ding, 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 this bell ring, and all these kids, about 5, 6-year-old kids, came out, marching in a line, came out of the school, marched down, came over, went into the temple, sat down. The teacher got up, ding, and they all sat for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, ding, and then got up. We were all going, "Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool." So, but that's kind of a secular thing, so I don't know how we
yeah.
there's so much about what I mean, I basically got run out of the Styles unit, where we
Mm.
were first started, right, we told you at the very beginning,
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
that ethics class, because
Mm.
the ethics class drew 60 people to the meditation. We had to go into the chapel,
Mm.
and the evangelicals just lost their shit. I mean,
Yeah.
they completely lost it. I had to leave. I mean,
Yeah, it's unfortunate to me because if somebody, say, is Christian and they love Jesus and Jesus was about love and compassion and forgiveness, it would feel and seem logical and experiential that you would embrace anyone going to God in any way that's right for them.
yeah, so the second covenant, Jesus is telling us, love yourself, love God, and love your neighbor, right? How do I do that? How can I do that? How do I learn to do that? Meditation. The greatest power of meditation is we learn to do exactly that. We're experiencing how to love ourselves, aren't we? With equanimity, with compassion, with wisdom. And I have a lot of Christian friends, like the chaplain I'm working with right now, very devout Christian. We get along great. I mean, he's one of the best chaplains I've ever worked with. I mean, he's incredible, but not all of them are
Yeah,
that
I've
way.
had so many, whether it's rabbis or Christian people, any religion on in the podcast so far, and everyone gets to this place of humility and love and wisdom in some way, whatever their words are. But it always ends in this place, which is exactly what I assumed when I started this podcast would be the case. And it's been very refreshing to see all these different ways, but it comes down to being right here in your breath, in wisdom and compassion and love and understanding. And so I think that's really, really beautiful. And one thing I want to say about meditation that I think is really important, because I could just speak for myself, but a lot of people I was at one point in like some intense training type of thing, and it almost felt like meditation was this Olympic goal achievement that we were seeking. And what I see it as today is relaxing into who you are,
Exactly.
relaxing into integrity, into reality. And I think it's really important because our human brain is looking to do something. And in the doing, we're also missing that it's just relaxing and being into who we are. And that it's so beautiful because it's the most authentic thing. You just feel like, wow, I'm home. I don't have to put anything on. I don't have to do anything to be here other than be. And then from here, I can do good work in the world with integrity
Yeah,
and
but
love.
Jonathan, the pressure to be, you got to be busy, you got to be active, you got to be engaged, you have to be committed, you have to take care of business. This urgency, our kind of our culture, our cultural urgency is kind of our undoing
Hmm.
because you can take a 2-week vacation. Yeah, yeah, you can have that. You can do that. But other than that, it's like work, 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 and busy, busy, busy. And we're so easily distracted by everything that's around us and
Hmm.
everything that's going on, and we kind of forget what's really important.
I always been very curious. I always try to get behind, like, well, why? And the way I see it is, that makes sense to me, is that our survival system somehow has been triggered in modern society as how to live. And so living from survival all the time puts you in this sprint mode of like doing, doing, doing and trying to accomplish instead of realizing that the place we're running to, we're hoping to get to is right here. And survival mode is not going to give us what we're looking for, and resting into who we are will not only give us the experience we're looking for, but then allow us to be the most adaptable to live appropriately and with integrity. So I think it's always coming back to this place of rest and being in our heart and being with our breath and being right here that gives us the greatest joy and the greatest ability to do good in the world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think my greatest concern, and possibly even fear, is that we are so brainwashed. I think we are brainwashed. I really do. I mean, I think our whole politic today is a result of a very purposeful, deliberate brainwashing. What is brainwashing? There were a lot of research done on psychologists in the 50s. The kind of the beginning of cognitive psychology was this question of brainwashing. And brainwashing is being fed fearful data frequently,
Mm-hmm.
and, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it literally conditions the brain to create
Mm-hmm.
a reality that doesn't exist. I mean, psychologists in the
Mm-hmm.
50s got to the point where they could condition someone to have a memory of something they never actually experienced. It's powerful. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, no, it does seem like that. Who knows the intention and all the hows, but it is kind of mind boggling at times to see how far we can get in our own mind from just being here with each other as the human family. Like how far away we become like machines, and seeing each other as machines and not being a we of a human family again.
But see, here's what's close. Here's what's really close. Having access to both the means and the intention to increase a market share of whatever product, and it can be a physical product, a spiritual product, a personality product, but having both the means and the
Hmm.
skill to do that, to have access to frequently impart information that is fear-based. If you don't have enough, you won't be successful.
Right on.
If you
Right
don't
on.
have enough, your life is not gonna be fulfilled.
Right on.
And what we're talking about is just the opposite of that, isn't it?
Yeah.
We already have enough. We have enough. We are enough. If there's anything else that comes out of learning to meditate, is that we learn that we are enough. We're more than enough. Our potential is enormous. Our capacity is enormous. Our capacity to love is unlimited. There's no boundaries there. But that's not the data we're getting. We're getting data that we're not enough, that this isn't enough. You need more. You need more of this. You need more of that. You need to vote over here. You need to live over there. Very
Is
restless.
is it fair to say that if, and I would love you to say, but that if you had a message to each human being that listens to this, it would be, if you can just be, you'll realize that you're enough and you can get off the treadmill of sprinting to try to do things?
Yeah, you don't have to undo. You don't really have to undo anything. Just yeah, exactly as you say. We are enough. We are love. We are compassion. We are wisdom. that's who we are. There's what we are, which is like some kind of an identity that we've taken on to be successful. There's how we are, which is our conditioning, what we've learned over the course of our life. But deeper than that is who we are. And who we are is essentially
Hmm.
wise and compassionate. That's who we are.
Hmm.
So I would say, who
Right
are you?
on.
Who are you? Ask
Hmm.
yourself, who am I? That's probably the beginning of a spiritual path is asking ourselves the question, who am I?
I remember that very intensely, that was like the fire that I experienced that made me have to know
Exactly.
that question.
And the data is
Yeah.
there. The information is there. The wisdom is already there of who we are.
Mm.
Deeply,
It's
profoundly,
beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me, I've heard of this Israeli teacher once, and her whole teaching was just listen. And I think it's what you're saying is like, if you just listen, you're going to hear and feel and see
Turn this
that
off.
what you are is enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
listen to ourselves. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate this time with you.
I agree. It's a very nice conversation, Jonathan. I don't know how it happened. It's a mystery how we're sitting here having this conversation, but I deeply appreciate it. I deeply
Yeah.
appreciate your interest and your efforts and whatever else you're doing. It's awesome. I could just
Thank you.
know that it is.
Thank you. And I appreciate one thing. I love so many things about doing this podcast. But one thing I get so moved by every time I'm speaking with somebody to see the maturity and the work they've done with themselves and as much almost of the goodness they're doing it with others, like both to me. And the whole thing with this podcast was like this one spirit, many paths. And then spirituality is very practical.
Mm,
And
very
my
proud.
experience of meeting with everybody has shown those two pillars of this podcast to be so beautifully true and alive. And I'm so thankful for having this time with you and others in this way, and also being moved by seeing and hearing and feeling the work that you have done and you are doing. So thank you for your commitment to love and wisdom in yourself and others.
I would say it's not just practical. What we're talking about is not just practical. I think it's existential. I think this is important work. This is vitally important work. I mean, I don't want to get up on a pulpit here, but it's kind of like that.
No, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, and I think in some ways I do feel that our purpose is to wake up to love and wisdom in ourselves and then to honor that in the world, whatever way is our way, and to do that fully. And that will allow us to experience life in the way that I think we're invited to.
It's the only way humanity is going to stick around. It's existential. I mean, it's literally existential.
Thank you for being part of the Spiritual Ninja podcast. I really appreciate you being here. My goal with the podcast is to share heart to heart, soul to soul conversations. So if you would be so kind to share and to follow, that helps me get the word out about the podcast. Okay. Thank you, and hope to see you on another podcast soon.